I'm Alexandra, 32 female. I live in a small but comfortable apartment in the city, a place I built for myself through years of hard work as a data analyst. It's my sanctuary, usually a place of peace, but recently it became the backdrop for the loneliest night of my life. This is the story of how my family's quiet betrayal on my birthday led to a decision that would create a deafening silence, and how I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The silence in my apartment was the first sign that my 32nd birthday would be different. It wasn't an oppressive silence, not at first. It was just empty. Usually, the morning of my birthday would start with a barrage of texts, a cheerful, slightly off-key, happy birthday, voice message from my mom, Nancy, and a flurry of emojis from my younger cousin, Molly. This year, my phone screen remained dark. I woke up at my usual 7:00 a.m., the sunlight streaming through my blinds, and the only notification was a calendar reminder. Birthday, as if I could forget. I work as a senior data analyst for a large tech firm. My job is about finding patterns, connecting disparate points of information to form a coherent, logical picture. It's a skill that requires patience, attention to detail, and the ability to detach emotionally to see the cold, hard facts. For years, I had unknowingly applied this skill to my family dynamics. I saw the patterns, the last-minute calls for financial help, the way family events always seemed to revolve around my cousin Molly's latest drama, the subtle expectation that my stability was a safety net for everyone else. But I had always overlaid these patterns with an emotional filter of love and duty. I was the responsible one, the reliable Alexandra. It was a role I had accepted, and in some ways, embraced. That morning, I made myself a coffee and sat by the window, watching the city wake up. By 9:00 a.m., a single text came through. It was from my mom. "Happy birthday, sweetie. Sorry things are so hectic here. We'll have to do something low-key tonight. Love you." No call, no emojis. Just a perfunctory message that felt more like a logistical update than a celebration of my existence. I stared at it for a long moment, the warmth of my coffee cup doing little to chase away the chill creeping into my chest. Hectic was my family's default state, usually a prelude to a request. I texted back, "No problem, Mom. Looking forward to it." A simple, accommodating reply, the Alexandra they knew. My best friend, Vanessa, called at 9:05 a.m. sharp, her voice a burst of energy that made me smile for the first time that day. "Happy birthday, Alex. I swear you don't age. Tell me all the plans. Are we doing dinner? Drinks? Is Nancy making her famous lasagna that I always try to steal the recipe for?" I let out a small laugh, the sound foreign in the quiet room. "Hey, V, thanks. And no, it's just a low-key thing tonight. Mom said things are hectic." There was a pause on the other end. Vanessa, a lawyer, was even better at reading between the lines than I was. She didn't just see patterns, she saw intent. Hectic? What does that mean? Is Collins back acting up again? Did Molly decide she needs to start a new podcast by midnight and demand the whole family's participation? "I don't know," I admitted, swirling the dregs of my coffee. "Just hectic." "Okay," Vanessa said, her tone shifting from celebratory to cautious. "Well, my offer still stands. I can ditch my boring Wednesday night and we can go to that Italian place you love, my treat." I appreciated the offer more than she knew, but the pull of family obligation was a deeply ingrained habit. "Thanks, V, but I should be with them. It's my birthday. I'm sure it'll be fine." "If you say so," she said, though her voice was laced with doubt. "Call me later, and I mean it. Don't let them walk all over you, not today." I promised I would, and we hung up. The rest of my workday was a blur of spreadsheets and data models. I took the day off, but my mind kept drifting to work, to the clean, predictable logic of numbers. It was easier than thinking about the vague disappointment that was settling over me. Around 4:00 p.m., my mom called. Her voice was rushed, tired. "Hi, honey, just calling about tonight," she said, the sound of a television loud in the background. "Your Uncle Colin and I are just completely wiped out. It's been a day. Would you be terribly upset if we just ordered some takeout and called it an early night? We can celebrate properly on the weekend." I felt a familiar pang. It was the feeling of being deprioritized, of my own wants being gently but firmly pushed aside for their convenience. I had felt it countless times before, but on my birthday it felt sharper. "Oh, sure, Mom, that's fine, whatever is easiest for you guys." "You're a doll," she said, the relief in her voice palpable. "I'll order a pizza to your place. My treat. We'll get your favorite pepperoni and mushroom." "Okay," I said, my voice small. "Thanks." "All right, sweetie. Happy birthday again. We love you. Talk tomorrow." And she was gone. No, how was your day? No, what do you want to do? Just a problem solved. My birthday celebration had been reduced to a logistical issue, and the solution was a pizza delivered to my door so I could be alone. I looked around my silent apartment. The hectic day they'd had was apparently so draining that a simple dinner was too much to ask. My Uncle Colin, a construction worker, was often tired, and my mom, recently laid off from her retail manager job, was stressed about money. I understood that. I always tried to be understanding. So I accepted it. I accepted the solitude. I accepted the pizza that arrived at 6:30 p.m., the delivery guy offering a cheerful, happy birthday. Because of the note my mom had obviously included in the online order. It was a detail that was somehow worse than if she'd forgotten entirely. It was a performance of care without any of the actual effort. I tipped him generously and closed the door, the box of pizza feeling ridiculously large and sad in my hands. I ate 2 slices straight from the box while standing in my kitchen, scrolling through my phone. A few more birthday wishes had trickled in from friends and old colleagues. I answered each one with a cheerful thank you emoji, playing the part of a person who was having a perfectly normal, happy birthday. I put the rest of the pizza in the fridge, the thought of eating more making me feel vaguely sick. By 8:00 p.m., I gave up. I washed my face, changed into my pajamas, and climbed into bed. I put on a mindless show on my laptop, the canned laughter filling the void. I told myself it was fine. It was just one day. They were tired. They were stressed. They loved me. They would make it up to me on the weekend. I repeated these things to myself, a mantra of rationalization I had perfected over years. But as I lay there, bathed in the blue light of the screen, a profound sense of loneliness washed over me. It wasn't just about a missed dinner or a lack of cake. It was the quiet, creeping realization that the people who were supposed to put you first, just once a year, hadn't even considered it. They were too tired, and I, as always, was understanding. I fell asleep before 9:00 p.m., my 32nd birthday ending not with a bang or even a whimper, but with the hollow echo of a quiet, empty apartment. The story of my family's finances is a tangled web of good intentions and bad decisions, with me as the perpetually available spider, spinning silk to patch the holes. My father passed away when I was in college, leaving behind a modest life insurance policy that my mother, Nancy, managed to burn through in less than 5 years. It wasn't malice on her part, just a fundamental inability to live within her means, a trait she shared with her brother, my Uncle Colin. Colin was a man who believed that things would always work out, which was his code for Alexandra will help. His daughter, my cousin Molly, was the center of their universe. She was 6 years younger than me, beautiful, and possessed a chaotic charm that people mistook for ambition. She'd flitted from one passion to another, photography, jewelry making, event planning, each one requiring a significant financial investment from the family, which, by proxy, meant from me. Her latest venture was becoming a lifestyle blogger and influencer, a career that seemed to involve taking artfully arranged photos of expensive coffee and complaining about the algorithm. She was the dreamer, the creative, the one who needed to be nurtured and protected from the harsh realities of the world. I was the pragmatist, the worker bee, the one who dealt with those realities so they didn't have to. This dynamic was established early. When I got my first full-time job, I started helping my mom with her bills. It began with the phone bill, then utilities, and soon I was covering a portion of her mortgage each month. When Colin needed a new set of tires for his truck so he could get to work, I loaned him the money. When Molly needed a new laptop for her brand, I was the one who bought it for her, a late birthday present. The requests were always framed as emergencies, temporary setbacks. "Just until I get back on my feet," my mom would say. "Just until this next big job comes through," Colin would promise. But they never quite got back on their feet, and the big job was always just around the corner. I never kept a running tally of the money. To do so would have been to admit the true nature of the arrangement, to acknowledge that I wasn't helping so much as enabling. It was easier to see it as my duty. I was good with money. I had a stable career. They were struggling. What kind of daughter, what kind of niece would I be if I said no? My best friend Vanessa saw it differently. She called it the reliability tax. "You're so dependable that they've forgotten you're a person with your own needs, Alex," she told me over coffee a few months before my birthday. "You're a line item in their budget. Car payment, groceries, Alexandra's contribution. It's not healthy." I had brushed it off at the time. It's not like that. They do the same for me. But even as I said it, a part of me knew it wasn't true. They couldn't do the same for me because they didn't have the means. I had structured my entire adult life around being the one who didn't need help. The weekend before my birthday, I had called my mom to talk about plans. Her voice was distracted. "Oh, honey, right? Your birthday. You know, things are just so tight this month." The layoff hit me harder than I expected, and Colin's hours got cut again. This was the preamble, the justification before the ask. I knew what was coming. I had a bonus from work sitting in my savings account, and I felt a familiar sense of resignation. "Don't worry about a big gift, Mom," I said, trying to preempt the conversation I didn't want to have. "Let's just do a nice dinner, my treat." "You're such a good daughter," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. But about dinner, Molly was thinking of having a little get-together on Saturday, just a small thing, to celebrate her hitting 5,000 followers. I blinked. A party for 5,000 followers. The Saturday before my birthday. "Well, yes, it's just when her friends are free. You don't mind, do you? We can do your thing during the week." I didn't mind. Of course, I didn't mind. I was the accommodating one. So I spent that Saturday night at my uncle's cramped house, watching Molly preen for selfies while her friends, who all looked exactly like her, talked about engagement metrics and brand collaborations. I brought a nice bottle of wine and a cheese platter, which Molly photographed for her Instagram story with the hashtag #FamilySupport. I spent most of the evening talking to Colin about the rising cost of lumber and listening to my mom complain about her fruitless job search. No one mentioned my upcoming birthday. It was an evening dedicated entirely to Molly's minor social media achievement. Looking back, the signs were all there. The hectic day, the tiredness, it was all a flimsy excuse. But on the night of my birthday, curled up alone in my bed, I still clung to the belief that it was just poor planning, just a moment of thoughtlessness. I had built a fortress of justifications around their behavior because the alternative was too painful to consider, that it wasn't thoughtless at all. It was a choice. They had looked at the landscape of their week, at their obligations and desires, and decided that my birthday was not a priority. It was an inconvenience to be managed, a box to be checked with a pizza delivery. The most cutting part was the history. For every one of Molly's birthdays, there was a production. One year, it was a surprise trip to a winery, which I largely paid for. For her 25th, it was a catered party in their backyard, and my gift was covering the cost of the caterer. Her achievements, no matter how small, were cause for massive celebration. My achievements, a promotion at work, buying my own apartment, were met with a quiet, "That's nice, dear," usually followed by a reminder of how much their own property taxes had gone up. I was the family's infrastructure, the roads, the power lines, the plumbing. Essential, but completely taken for granted. You only notice the infrastructure when it breaks. And as I lay in the dark on my 32nd birthday, I felt the first hairline fracture spreading through the foundation. I didn't know it yet, but the entire structure was about to come crashing down. The pattern I had ignored for so long was about to be laid bare, not by complex data analysis, but by the casual, careless cruelty of a social media post. And the picture it would paint would be clearer and more devastating than any spreadsheet I had ever created. I woke up a little after 1:00 a.m. A car alarm was blaring on the street below, a shrill, insistent noise that had pierced through my sleep. My laptop was still open on the comforter next to me, the screen dark. My mouth was dry, and the loneliness from earlier had curdled into a sour feeling in the pit of my stomach. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my thumb swiping through the lock screen out of pure, mindless habit. I had no intention of looking for anything in particular. It was just the modern-day reflex for filling empty moments. I opened Instagram. The app greeted me with a cascade of brightly colored squares, friends on vacation, ads for meal kits, a celebrity's new puppy. And then I saw it. The first post was from one of Molly's influencer friends, someone I'd met briefly at the 5,000 followers party. It was a group photo, a noisy, joyful explosion of people crammed into a booth at a fancy downtown restaurant. There were balloons, big, silver mylar balloons that spelled out "Congrats." In the center of the table was a dessert, a ridiculously elaborate chocolate lava cake, with a single, large sparkler shooting fountains of gold into the air. And around the table, beaming, were my family. My mom, Nancy, was there, a glass of white wine held aloft, her face split in a wide, untired grin. My Uncle Colin was next to her, his arms slung around Molly's shoulders, laughing at something someone off camera had said. And Molly was glowing. She was the star of the show, her hands clasped under her chin in a gesture of pure, performative delight. They were all there. Every single person who, just 5 hours earlier, had been too tired to even share a meal with me. My heart started to pound, a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I felt a wave of nausea. This couldn't be right. I tapped on Molly's profile icon. Her story was a series of short, boisterous video clips. The first clip was a toast. My uncle's voice, loud and clear, boomed, "To our girl, Molly, landed her first big brand deal. We always knew you had it in you." The whole table erupted in cheers. My mom leaned in and kissed Molly's cheek, her eyes shining with pride. A brand deal? That was the occasion. A sponsorship from some obscure skincare company was apparently a monumental event, worthy of a surprise weeknight celebration at a restaurant that I knew for a fact was expensive. A restaurant I had once suggested for my own birthday and been told was a bit much. I scrolled to the next clip. It was a close-up of the cake, the sparkler still fizzing. My mom's voice was in the background. "Oh, Molly, it's wonderful. You deserve it all, sweetie. You've worked so hard." Worked so hard. The words were like a physical blow. I thought of the 60-hour weeks I pulled to meet deadlines, the weekend projects I took on to build my savings, the constant, low-grade stress of my demanding job. The job that funded this very celebration. The job that paid for the laptop she used to secure this brand deal. The job that kept the lights on in their homes so they could be free to support her dreams. They weren't just tired. They had lied. They had actively, deliberately lied to me to exclude me from their joy. They didn't want me there. My hands were shaking as I kept scrolling. There were more photos, more videos, tagged pictures from her friends, all captioned with fawning praise. Proud family, making dreams happen, celebration. Each post was another twist of the knife. In one photo, my mom was holding up a gift bag from a designer store, her expression one of pure glee. They had money for expensive gifts and downtown dinners, but not for my birthday. The hectic day, the exhaustion, the need to order me a consolation pizza, it was all a charade. A carefully constructed lie to get me out of the way. Why? The question screamed in my mind. Why lie? Why not just tell me? "Hey Alex, we're so excited for Molly, we're taking her out to celebrate tonight. Can we do your birthday another time?" I would have been hurt, yes. I would have felt overshadowed as usual. But I would have understood on some level. I would have said, of course, go celebrate, and quietly dealt with my own disappointment. But the lie was different. the lie was a conscious act of deception. It was a statement. It told me that my presence was so undesirable, so unimportant, that they would rather invent a story than have me at their table. It meant they couldn't even pretend to be happy for Molly in front of me. Perhaps they knew that celebrating her frivolous success on the very night they had dismissed my existence would be too much, even for the ever-understanding Alexandra. I felt a cold, terrifying clarity wash over me. All the small slights, the forgotten promises, the casual disrespect from over the years, they weren't random acts of thoughtlessness. They were data points in a larger pattern. I was the utility. Molly was the ornament. You don't invite the plumbing to the party, you just expect it to work quietly in the background. I finally clicked out of the app and threw my phone onto the empty pillow beside me as if it were contaminated. I curled into a ball, wrapping my arms around my stomach, trying to hold myself together. There were no tears. I was past tears. I was in a state of shock, a hollowed-out space where my naive love for my family used to be. The canned laughter from the TV show I'd forgotten was still playing, a grotesque soundtrack to the collapse of my world. I lay there for what felt like hours, replaying the images in my mind. My mother's joyful smile, the balloons, the cake. Every detail was seared into my memory. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was an erasure. On the one day of the year that was supposed to be about me, they had celebrated someone else and concocted a lie to make sure I spent it alone. They hadn't just forgotten my birthday. They had actively, meticulously, and deliberately uncelebrated it. And in doing so, they had shown me the truth. Not the truth about their finances or their stress levels, but the truth about my place in their lives. I wasn't just low on their list of priorities. I wasn't on the list at all. The next morning, I woke up with a headache and a sense of grim resolve. The shock had subsided overnight, replaced by a cold, analytical anger. The emotional part of my brain had shut down and the data analyst had taken over. For years, I had been operating on a faulty dataset, one corrupted by sentiment and obligation. Now, I had new, undeniable evidence. It was time to run the numbers. I didn't call them, I didn't send an angry text. I knew that any confrontation would devolve into a predictable mess of excuses and gaslighting. "Oh, honey, it wasn't like that," my mom would say. "It was a last-minute thing. We didn't want to bother you." Molly would accuse me of being jealous and trying to ruin her moment. Colin would mumble something about how I was too sensitive. I had seen this play out 100 times in smaller ways. They would twist the narrative until I was the one apologizing for being hurt. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Not this time. Instead, I opened my laptop and created a new spreadsheet. It was a simple 2-column document. Column A, date. Column B, amount. I logged into my online banking portal and started scrolling back, month by month, year by year. It was a painful, tedious process, a digital excavation of my own generosity. The first entries were small. $50 here for groceries. $100 there for a utility bill. But as I went further back, the numbers grew and the frequency increased. I found the $800 I'd sent my mom for a dental emergency that, in hindsight, coincided with Molly's weekend trip to a music festival. I found the $1,500 I had transferred to my Uncle Colin for truck repairs, just 2 days before he posted photos of a new big-screen TV in his living room. And then there were the big ones. The $5,000 I'd given my mom as a loan to consolidate her credit card debt, a loan she never once made a payment on. The $2,000 for Molly's professional camera for her photography phase. Every transaction was a story of their need and my compliance. I was their emergency fund, their line of credit with no interest and no expectation of repayment. I cross-referenced the dates with my own calendar and social media history. A pattern emerged, so clear and damning that I felt stupid for not seeing it sooner. The biggest requests for money almost always came right before one of Molly's birthdays, or one of her new career launches, or a family vacation that I was conveniently too busy with work to attend. They were using my hard-earned money to fund a lifestyle for themselves, a lifestyle that pointedly excluded me. The final tally was staggering. Over the last 5 years alone, I had given them just over $47,000. I stared at the number on the screen, a cold, hard fact that could not be argued away. $47,000. It was the down payment on a house. It was a master's degree. It was years of my life, distilled into a number that had bought me nothing but disrespect and a lonely birthday pizza. The spreadsheet was my anchor, the concrete evidence that I wasn't overreacting. This wasn't about a forgotten birthday dinner. It was about a long, sustained pattern of financial and emotional exploitation. They didn't see me as family, they saw me as a resource, a well that would never run dry. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Vanessa. "Hey, how was the low-key birthday night? Feeling recovered." I called her immediately. My voice was flat, void of emotion as I laid out the facts. The too tired excuse. The Instagram story. The restaurant, the balloons, the brand deal, the spreadsheet. I recited the final number to her, $47,000. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Vanessa finally spoke, her voice was low and furious. "Alex, oh my God, I am going to sue them for emotional damages." "You can't sue your own client's family," I said, a small, humorless smile touching my lips. "Watch me," she shot back. "Okay, forget that. What are you going to do? Have you talked to them?" "No," I said, my gaze fixed on the spreadsheet. "Talking is pointless. They'll just lie. They'll deny, deflect, and manipulate. It's what they do. It's part of their process." "So what's your process?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. My job was to analyze systems and identify points of failure. The system of my family was fundamentally broken. The flow of resources was entirely one-sided. The emotional returns were non-existent. Any analyst looking at this system would recommend a total shutdown. "I'm done," I said, and the words felt incredibly simple and incredibly heavy. "I'm shutting it down, all of it." "What does that mean?" Vanessa asked gently. "Blocking them for how long?" "It means the bank is closed," I said. "Permanently. No more loans, no more gifts, no more covering bills, and no more of my time. No more Saturday nights celebrating Molly's follower count. No more listening to my mom complain about a job search she isn't really doing. No more being the responsible one who cleans up their messes." "They're not going to take that well, Alex," she warned. "Their entire financial model depends on you." "I know," I said, "and for the first time in my life, I don't care. Let them be hectic. Let them be tired. Let them figure it out." They celebrated Molly's first big brand deal. It's time for her to start contributing to the family that supports her so much. The plan began to form in my mind, not as an act of revenge, but as an act of self-preservation. It was a simple, quiet rebellion. I wouldn't scream or shout. I wouldn't send them the spreadsheet or a list of my grievances. That would be giving them something to argue with, a conflict to engage in. I was simply going to withdraw. I would sever the connection, cut the power line, and turn off the water. I spent the rest of the day fortifying my resolve. I went to the gym and ran on the treadmill until my legs ached, the physical exertion a welcome distraction. I cooked myself a healthy meal, the first real food I'd had since the pizza. I cleaned my apartment, methodically wiping away any lingering sense of sadness and neglect. With each small act of self-care, I felt stronger. I knew the test would come. It always did. The end of the month was approaching, and with it, the inevitable text from my mom about the mortgage. It usually arrived around the 25th, a casual, friendly message that was anything but. For years, I had dreaded that text. Now I found myself waiting for it. I was ready. I had my data. I had my evidence. And I had a single, powerful word that I had never used with them before: no. The next few days were an exercise in quiet discipline. I went to work, immersed myself in my projects, and spoke to my colleagues with a professionalism that belied the turmoil beneath the surface. My family, for their part, seemed to be giving me space. I received a text from my mom the day after my birthday. "Hope you enjoyed the pizza. Let's plan on that makeup celebration for this weekend. Let me know what you want to do." It was a masterful piece of manipulation. The message was cheerful, forward-looking, and completely ignored the events of my birthday night. It was an invitation to collude in their lie, to pretend along with them that nothing had happened. The old Alexandra would have latched onto the offer of a makeup celebration. She would have replied, "Sounds great," and buried her hurt for the sake of keeping the peace. But the old Alexandra was gone, replaced by a woman with a spreadsheet and a spine of steel. I simply didn't reply. I knew my silence would be its own message. In a family that communicated through a constant stream of texts and calls, my unresponsiveness would be a glaring anomaly. A day passed. Then two. My phone remained silent. No follow-up texts from my mom. No, "Are you okay?" It was telling. They didn't actually care if I was okay. They were likely just annoyed that I wasn't playing my part. On the third day, a text from Molly popped up. "Hey Alex, Mom says you're not answering. Everything good? The brand deal is official, BTW. So exciting." It was accompanied by a link to her latest blog post, which detailed her journey to becoming a micro-influencer. I clicked on it out of a morbid curiosity. The post was filled with glossy, professional-looking photos taken with the camera I had bought her. Long, self-congratulatory narrative about hard work and perseverance. My name was not mentioned. My contribution was, as always, invisible. I closed the browser and deleted her text without a reply. This was the hardest part, holding the line. Every instinct I had, conditioned by years of being the family peacekeeper, screamed at me to respond, to smooth things over, to make everything okay. It was like an addiction. My family was the drug, and I was going through withdrawal. Vanessa was my sponsor. I called her every night. "They're trying to pull you back in," she said on the fourth night. "The silence is making them nervous. Not because they miss you, but because the end of the month is coming up. You're ignoring the pre-ask pleasantries. It's disrupting the system." "I feel guilty," I confessed, pacing my living room. "I feel mean." "What's meaner?" Vanessa countered, her voice sharp and clear. "Ignoring a text, or lying to your daughter's face, ditching her on her birthday to throw a secret party for someone else, all while living off her money? Let's get some perspective here, Alex. You're not being mean. You're establishing a boundary where one has never existed." She was right. I had to reframe my thinking. This wasn't punishment. It was a consequence. Their actions had led to this. My silence was a direct and logical result of their betrayal. On the morning of the 25th, exactly as predicted, the text I had been waiting for arrived. It was from my mom. It began, as it always did, with a veneer of casual concern. "Hi, sweetie. Haven't heard from you. I hope you're not still upset about your birthday. Things have just been so stressful, you know, with me not working and Colin's hours being so unreliable. Anyway, I hate to even ask, but the mortgage is due next week, and we're about $3,000 short. Any chance you could help us out? We'll pay you back as soon as my unemployment comes through." I read the message 3 times. The audacity of it was breathtaking. She acknowledged my potential anger. "I hope you're not still upset," and then dismissed it in the very next breath by immediately asking for a huge sum of money. She saw my hurt as a temporary inconvenience, a minor obstacle on the path to getting what she wanted. There was no apology, no remorse, just an expectation of my continued financial support. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I felt a surge of adrenaline, the kind you get before a major presentation or a difficult conversation. This was it. The point of no return. My plan had been to simply ignore her, to let the silence be my answer. But her message, so blatant in its disregard for my feelings, demanded a response. It required a clear, unequivocal statement. I typed out a reply. My hands were perfectly steady. The words were simple, direct, and devastatingly effective. They were the coldest, most honest words I had ever written to my own mother. "Ask the ones you celebrate." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The message delivered instantly. For a moment, nothing happened. The world didn't end. The sky didn't fall. There was only the quiet hum of my refrigerator and the frantic beating of my own heart. Then the 3 little dots appeared. She was typing. They appeared and disappeared several times. I could picture her on the other end, her mind racing, trying to formulate a response that would regain control of the situation. Finally, a message came through. What is that supposed to mean? I didn't dignify it with a response. I had said everything that needed to be said. My one-sentence reply was a mirror, forcing them to look at their own behavior. It connected their celebration of Molly with their expectation of my money. It was a perfect, self-contained piece of logic. There was no arguing with it. I placed my phone face down on the counter. Then I did the one thing I had never done before. I went into my contacts, found Mom, Uncle Colin, and Molly, and I blocked their numbers. I blocked them on my social media accounts. I blocked their email addresses. With each tap of the screen, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. It was a digital amputation, a severing of toxic ties. I was drawing a line not in the sand, but in concrete. I knew the fallout would be immediate and intense. But as I stood in my kitchen, the morning sun warming my face, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. I had finally stopped analyzing the pattern and had taken steps to break it. The bank was officially, irrevocably closed. And I was, for the first time, truly free. The silence lasted for exactly 47 minutes. Then, the landline in my apartment, a relic I kept mainly for my building's intercom system, began to ring. It was a shrill, unfamiliar sound. I never got calls on my landline. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again, and again. They were trying to find a way around the wall I had built. My cell phone, Thaug H silent, began to light up with notifications on the lock screen. Missed call. Missed call. They were coming from a number I didn't recognize, then another. They were using their friends' phones, trying to breach my defenses. I calmly silenced the notifications and ignored the ringing. The true siege began the next morning. When I woke up at 6:00 a.m., my phone's call log was a testament to their panic. There were 61 missed calls. 61, from a dozen different numbers. They had spent their night in a frenzy, unable to comprehend that their reliable resource was no longer responding. The sheer volume of calls wasn't about concern for my well-being. It was about the mortgage. It was the frantic, desperate scrabbling of people who had just had their safety net yanked away without warning. And then there was the one text, sent from a number belonging to one of Molly's friends. It was from my mother. It was 5 words long. Don't do this to us. The wording was everything. Not don't do this to yourself, or let's talk about this. It was don't do this to us. It framed my act of self-preservation as an attack on them. In their eyes, I was the aggressor. My refusal to be their ATM was an act of cruelty. It was the final, perfect piece of data I needed to confirm that I had done the right thing. I saved a screenshot of the text, and then blocked that number too. I knew they wouldn't give up. Their next move would be to bypass the digital blockade and try to confront me in person. I called Vanessa on my way to work, updating her on the overnight developments. 61 calls, she whistled. That's not concern, that's a denial of service attack. You need to be prepared for them to show up at your apartment or even your office. My office has security, I said, feeling a strange sense of detachment. They won't get past the front desk. My apartment is another story. Just don't answer the door, she advised. You don't owe them a confrontation, Alex. You've made your statement. But I knew a confrontation was inevitable. My mother wasn't the type to let go. Control was her currency, and she had just had all of her accounts frozen. It happened 2 days later. I was working from home, enjoying the quiet productivity of my apartment when my intercom buzzed. I checked the small, grainy camera screen. It was my mother, Nancy, and my uncle, Colin. They were standing on my front steps, my mother's face a mask of pinched fury, my uncle looking uncomfortable and out of place behind her. I ignored the buzz. A few moments later, it buzzed again, longer this time, more insistent. I continued to ignore it. Then came the banging on my door. Alexandra, I know you're in there. Open this door right now. My mother's voice, muffled but sharp, cut through the wood. My heart was hammering, but my resolve didn't waver. I walked over to the door and looked through the peephole. My mother's eye was pressed right up against the other side, a distorted, cyclopean image of rage. It was terrifying. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "You can't just cut off your family. We need to talk." I remained silent. Her banging became more frantic. "Alexandra, please, we're worried about you." The lie was so bald-faced it was almost funny. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about themselves. "Let's just go, Nancy," I heard Colin mutter. "This isn't working." "No," she snapped. "She is going to open this door and listen to me." I decided to give them one final, controlled confrontation. I didn't want a shouting match. I just wanted to deliver my closing statement. I took a deep breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and opened the door just enough to see them, leaving the security chain in place. They both blinked, surprised by my sudden appearance. My mother's face immediately hardened. "Finally, what is wrong with you? We've been calling and calling. Are you trying to punish us?" I looked at her, then at my uncle, who wouldn't meet my eyes. I kept my voice calm and even the way I would in a boardroom when presenting uncomfortable findings. "There's nothing wrong with me," I said. "And I'm not punishing you. I have simply decided to stop funding a family that lies to me and excludes me. You made it very clear on my birthday where I stand. I've decided to accept that." My mother scoffed. "Oh, for heaven's sake, you're still on about that? It was a last-minute thing for Molly. We were going to celebrate with you on the weekend. You're blowing this all out of proportion over a silly dinner." "It wasn't a silly dinner," I said, my voice unwavering. "It was a lie. You said you were tired. You weren't. You said you were staying in. You didn't. You sent me a pizza so I would be out of the way while you threw a party for someone else with money I probably gave you. Do you have any idea how that felt?" Colin shuffled his feet. "Now, Alex, your mom didn't mean any harm." "Didn't she?" I countered, my eyes locking onto his. "Was it you, Uncle Colin, who was too wiped out to see me? Because you looked pretty energetic in those pictures, toasting Molly's success." He had the grace to look ashamed, his gaze dropping to the floor. My mother, however, was doubling down. "You are being unbelievably selfish. After everything we've done for you." The sheer absurdity of that statement almost made me laugh. "Everything you've done for me? Mom, I have a spreadsheet. I know exactly how much money I have given you, Colin, and Molly over the last 5 years. It's over $47,000. What have you done for me, other than expect me to be your personal bank?" The color drained from her face. The mention of a specific number, of a spreadsheet, had pierced her bubble of denial. It was data. It was proof. "So that's what this is about. Money," she sneered, recovering quickly. "You're holding money over our heads. How cold, how cruel." "No," I said, shaking my head. "This is what it's always been about for you. For me, it was about family. I see now that I was the only one who felt that way. The money is just the evidence. The birthday was the final proof. I'm done. The financial support ends now, and so does this conversation." I started to close the door. My mother's hand shot out and slapped against it. "You can't do this. The mortgage." "That is not my problem anymore," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "You have a successful new influencer in the family. I suggest you ask her for help." And with that, I closed the door, slid the deadbolt back into place, and leaned against it, my body trembling with the leftover adrenaline. I could hear my mother screaming on the other side, a string of insults and accusations. I closed my eyes and waited for it to stop. After a few minutes, the shouting subsided, replaced by the sound of retreating footsteps. And then, for the first time in a long time, there was only silence. The aftermath was not a sudden, explosive event, but a slow, creeping change. The silence that followed my mother and uncle's retreat from my doorstep was profound. The barrage of calls and texts stopped completely. It was as if, having failed to break down my door, they had simply vanished. In the first few days, the silence felt heavy, charged with unspoken anger and resentment. I kept expecting another knock, another desperate call from a new number. But nothing came. Vanessa checked in with me daily. "How are you holding up?" she'd ask. "Are you okay?" "I think so," I'd reply, and it was the truth. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't gloating. There was a deep, aching sadness for the family I thought I had, for the love I had so desperately wanted to be real. But beneath the sadness, there was a growing sense of peace. The constant, low-level anxiety that had been my companion for years, the dread of the next financial emergency, the stress of managing their expectations, was gone. I hadn't realized how much space it had taken up in my mind until it was no longer there. My finances began to change almost immediately. The portion of my paycheck that had been automatically earmarked for family support now went directly into my savings and investment accounts. I watched my net worth begin to climb at a faster rate than ever before. I looked at the $3,000 that would have gone to my mother's mortgage and, on a whim, booked myself a solo vacation to a small, quiet coastal town I'd always wanted to visit. It felt like a radical act of selfishness, and it was glorious. About a month after the confrontation, I got an email from a distant aunt, my mother's cousin. It was a carefully worded message, clearly written at my mother's behest. It spoke of forgiveness and the importance of family, and how my mother was distraught and didn't understand what she'd done wrong. It was another attempt to manipulate me, to use a different angle of attack. I replied with a polite but firm message. Thank you for your concern, but my decision is final. My relationship with my mother, uncle, and cousin is a private matter, and I will not be discussing it further. I never heard from that aunt again. The real news came in bits and pieces through the grapevine of social media. Vanessa, who still followed Molly out of a morbid sense of curiosity, was my primary source of information. Molly's influencer career, it turned out, was not the cash cow they had imagined. Her big brand deal had been a one-time payment of $500 and a box of free face cream. Her posts became less frequent, the glossy photos replaced by grainy selfies and vague complaints about being creatively drained. Then, about 3 months after I cut them off, Vanessa called me, her voice urgent. "You need to see this. Molly started a GoFundMe." My blood ran cold. I navigated to the link she sent me. The title of the campaign was Help a Family Avoid Foreclosure. The photo was a somber picture of my mother and Uncle Colin standing in front of their house. The text, written by Molly, was a masterclass in passive-aggressive fiction. It spoke of a sudden, unexpected financial hardship and a family member who has unfortunately chosen to step away during our time of need. It painted them as victims of a cruel, inexplicable betrayal. They were asking for $10,000. I read the whole thing, my face impassive. They had managed to raise $250, mostly from Molly's sympathetic but broke influencer friends. The public comments were a mix of "so sorry you're going through this" and "sending prayers." They were trying to monetize their victimhood, to crowdsource the role I had played for so long. "Are you okay?" Vanessa asked, her voice soft. "I am," I said, and I was surprised by how true it felt. This is just more data. It proves I was never a family member to them. I was a function. And now that I've stopped performing that function, they're trying to outsource it. I didn't donate. I didn't comment. I simply closed the browser. Their problems were no longer mine to solve. Their narrative was no longer mine to correct. Let them tell whatever story they wanted. The people who mattered, like Vanessa, knew the truth. And the only person whose opinion I truly cared about anymore was my own. The house was not foreclosed on. I found out later that Colin had to take out a high-interest loan and started working grueling overtime hours to make the payments. My mother, forced by necessity, finally took a full-time job at a supermarket, a position she considered beneath her. Molly, stripped of her financial cushion, got a job as a waitress at the very same restaurant where they had celebrated her brand deal. I never saw them again. I moved to a new apartment in a different part of the city a year later, and I changed my landline number. My life became my own. It was quieter, but it was also fuller. I traveled. I invested. I reconnected with old friends. I started dating someone, a kind and stable man who was impressed by my independence rather than seeing it as an opportunity. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that birthday. I think about the silence of my apartment, the sad, cold pizza, and the gut-wrenching betrayal I felt watching those Instagram stories. It was the most painful night of my life, but it was also the most liberating. It was the night the data analyst finally looked at the emotional spreadsheet of her own life and made the only logical conclusion. They hadn't just been too tired for my birthday. They had been too selfish for my love. And in cutting them off, I hadn't lost a family. I had simply walked away from a bad investment and, in doing so, finally found myself.